This is my dust collection system I have in my apartment workshop, and it consists of just a 2-bucket Cyclone that is homemade, and that's hooked up to a shop vac. It has served me well over the past couple of years, but I think it could be a lot better. The main issue of this Cyclone separator is the way that the separator was made. I have this set up where the inlet for the dust comes in through the top and then goes into a right angle elbow. And that is supposed to spin the dust around and then it falls to the bottom instead of going in the shop vac. But I think what's wrong with this is that there's this big elbow right in the way of where that circular motion is supposed to be happening. And that causes a lot of dust to be disturbed and actually end up going into the vacuum. And that causes the filters to still plug up even though there is a separator. So what I want to do is change from a system where the dust comes in from the top and change it to a system where the dust comes in tangentially at the side. And that way there won't be any obstructions on the inside, and hopefully that'll make for a more efficient dust collector. The first thing I'm going to do to start is to make an adapter for the top of the shop vac that will hook the shop vac onto the new dust collector portion below it. I'm going to make that out of 3/4 inch plywood, and the first thing to cut out is just a basic circle, and I'll cut that rough with a jigsaw and then flush it up with a router. I cut just outside the line with a jigsaw, and before I take it over to the router, I'm going to make sure my center is marked and drill a hole through there. This is my quick and dirty router table. It's literally just a router screwed to the bottom of a piece of plywood, and it's not even good plywood, so it's super basic. And then I also made this fence out of scraps, and it's mostly here for dust collection. I drilled a small hole in the table that lines up with the center of the disc, and that positions the center of the disc at the radius from the bit. And I'll just use a nail to line up the two holes, the hole in the table and the hole on the disc. And I'm going to drop that onto the router and route the circle using this simple setup. To route out the inside of the circle, I screwed these two bearings onto the platform, and I'll use those bearings as a guide, and I'll run the fresh, smooth outside of the circle on those two bearings. And as I rotate that around, that will be the guide to cut out the inside of this circle. I cut the notch out for the plastic, and I also put a small roundover on the edge, and now it fits very snugly around the top end of the shop vac. I cut 2 more circles using the same method of the jigsaw and the router, and these 2 circles are going to form the top section where the filter is going to sit. So I will cover this with a sheet of polycarbonate, and that'll form the top housing for the dust collector. Before I do that, I'm going to use some epoxy and fill in like the gaps that are on this plywood. I am not using nice Baltic birch plywood. This is just cheap plywood, so there are some voids that I need to fill to make sure that they don't crack over time. I've got a piece of 1/16 inch polycarbonate to make the sides of the bucket, and based off the inside dimension of that ring, I need to cut this to 40 1/4 inches by 13, just under 14 inches. And since I don't have a table saw, I'll try cutting it on the floor just using a razor. Now that the top and bottom rings are attached, I can go ahead and close up this seam by just using another piece of wood, and I'll fasten that from the inside. And with that, it's starting to look like something. But we're not quite done with this top section. The next thing we need to make is the baffle and separator part that goes inside. And for that, that's a couple more circles to cut out. But instead of using the router this time to flush it up, since I need this circle to fit precisely inside of this section, I just rough cut it out with a handsaw, and now I'm going to use the disc sander and use that to creep up on the line, and that way I can get a very precise fit. The separator I just cut out and the baffle that goes below it will be connected using this piece of black pipe. So I'll make the two connections and also cut out the center of this pipe, as that's where the airflow will go from the separator up through into the vacuum. Ah, my drill press is too small. With that, the top section is pretty much done, and now we can move on to the bottom bucket, and that is, of course, more polycarbonate And you guessed it, more circles. Now that I've got the two buckets assembled, I need a way to attach them together. And for the latch, I cut out this little hook from a piece of cutting board, and I shaped it on the disc sander and used a file to finish it off. And with these screws, I'll just use this as a simple latch. I also added two locating pins, and they line up to two holes in the upper portion of the bucket. And between those locating pins and the latches, this makes a really simple and secure latching method. I also need a way to fasten the shop vac head to the top portion of the Cyclone. So similar to the bottom, on this adapter plate, I've added 3 locating pins, and these pins ride on the inside of the bucket, allowing the adapter plate to find its home and allowing it to spin also. The head of the shop vac sits on the adapter plate, and to fasten the head to the adapter plate, I'll just use some screws right through the top. Now that the shop vac head and the adapter plate are attached, I still need a way to keep this assembly onto the Cyclone. And the shop vac originally had these plastic latches that hooked onto the plastic bucket from the original, but that obviously is not going to work the greatest here. So I made another latch, and if I cut this plastic piece off, and I add this latch, which I made out of a small block of oak, and another piece down below that swivels. And I can add that to the bucket here, to the adapter plate. There's only one thing left to do to finish off this Cyclone, and that is to add the inlet pipe that'll come in at the side, and I'll make that out of this 2-inch black pipe, and I'll do that next. I had drawn up this entire dust collector in the 3D modeling program SketchUp, and so I used that program to make a drawing so that I knew how to lay out the pieces for this inlet pipe. Currently don't have any dust collection, because there's the shop vac. It's getting pretty dusty in here. You definitely appreciate dust collection when you don't have any. I took everything apart and then painted all of the wood components with 3 coats of paint, and now I can put everything back together. And now the moment everyone has been waiting for. Once the bucket and the Cyclone were fully assembled again, I went over all of the joints between the wood and the polycarbonate with a bead of silicone, just to make sure everything was airtight. I also put a small gasket between the buckets and the top of the Cyclone to the vacuum, to also help seal everything up airtight. Well, I guess there's only one thing left to do. Let's try it out. I'm super happy with the way that this came out. It works awesome, and it looks awesome. Very happy. Thanks for watching. Inlet pipe. The one annoying thing about making a shop vac into a Cyclone while you're still using the shop vac is you gotta keep taking it apart and putting it back together.